Wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. First of all, I think I just would like to thank the IIIT as well as IKHS for inviting me to speak this morning. So I have been asked to talk about contemporary theories in media and communication. So starting out, I think it was a challenge for me to try to think of how best to encapsulate theory, especially talking about theory of contemporary, which is supposed to be what is in the present within this 45 minutes time frame. So I have tried to design it the best way I know how. So this is basically what I will be covering today. I will start about talking, to refresh, talking about what is theory and the role of theory in our area of study, which is the social science, contemporary Western communication theories, as well as trying to critique a little bit about what is problematic within the Western communication theory and how Islam and Islamic scholars have contributed to communication theory. So I think before I dive into communication, I would like to take a more broad start talking about what is theory. Especially in scholarship as well as in academia, I think theory has always been somewhat a contested or a misunderstood term because people in general would like to think that theory is something that is abstract or subjective, that people tend to use the word theory or theorize things when they cannot have specific explanation or when they don't have answers to certain things, and then they theorize. While that is not essentially wrong, I think that would be what we consider as theory in layman terms. Basically looking at theories as just an explanation of certain relationship. I think in our everyday life, we survive by going to theory by theory. For example, I think there is around 99 people here in this Zoom room. And why are we here today? Because we are living by a certain theory. Okay, probably Miss Aisha, Mr. Habib are all here because based on the theory that if we come here, you'll probably get a certificate, but more importantly, you will get knowledge. So the idea of just coming here is also a part of theory. But again, we consider it abstract because although all of us are here, some of us will get more knowledge than others. So this is the abstract part of theory. And also, I think I would like to say that generally, if you're talking about theory, every one of us is a theorist. We can all theorize. And I think the best theorists of all would be for example, I think our mothers lah. All right. Mothers have theories about everything. Okay, for example, I don't know how it is in other cultures because it's very fun to have international group here. But in Malaysia or maybe in Eastern and Asian culture, we have this simple theory that mothers always tell us, which is to wash our feet before we go to sleep. So looks like a very abstract relationship, but mothers would tell us wash your feet because if you don't wash your feet, you would go to sleep having nightmares. So this is the problem with theory, layman theory, because people could not make that connections based on this abstract assumption. But although we don't believe our mothers as being theorists, we do believe that what she say has some truth. Maybe have you tried going to sleep with a dirty body and feet? You will not get a good sleep and you might have nightmares, and your mother is correct. So is your mother a theorist? Yes. Was that relationship a theory? Yes, also. It's just that what we are talking about in this context, right, is trying to break away from these layman theories into what we would consider more scientific theory. So the theories that our mothers have, for example, like I've mentioned just now, going to sleep with washing your feet before going to sleep, it is the layman theory. But can we turn it into a scientific theory? A scholarly theory? Of course we can. But of course, then we're talking about theory that is scientific. And when we're talking about what is contemporary, then we're talking about scientific theories. So what are scientific theories? Theories that are relationships that are supported by methods, evidence, reasoning. theories that have been tested by thousands and thousands of research studies. So in general, I would say that contemporary theories are mostly grounded in this idea of positivism. So what is this positivism? It is like a philosophical approach that sees scholarship, that sees the world as something that is observable. And that when we talk about knowledge, it has to be something that is material, that is measurable, that is out there. So here we're talking about, okay, contemporary theories. When we mention it as being scientific, it has to be something that is measurable. So this is an important part that I think I would like to highlight, which is to differentiate what is theory in a layman term and theory when we talk about contemporary scholarship. So why is this stress, what we call it, why is this focus on scientific, being scientific? All right, as you know that we are here in the area of social science and arts, we're not really looking at what science is doing, okay? But we really still want to take the term science because science is this systematic pursuit of knowledge, you know, about natural and social world through observation and experimentation. Okay, what is this recognition towards science? Because science focuses on logical reasoning, evidences, you know, methods. As you know, for example, in social science, maybe in sociology, in history, as well as in communication, what we study is human behaviors. So human behaviors sometimes is not quite measurable, okay? So it is sometimes hard for people that study human behaviors to get acknowledgement. Not like how a scientist, okay, that studies a new innovation or invention gets their acknowledgement. Why do science always get the acknowledgement? Because the scientific process is often trusted. For example, I think when we go to the clinics, right, when we are sick, we trust the doctor because we believe that he has gone through all this scientific process. He has done the experiments, he has gone to school, so we don't question the doctors. Okay, but when we try to talk about assumptions made about human behaviors, okay, about religiosity, about good communication process, it is always something that is abstract. So that is why, okay, when we do research in our areas where in the social sciences, we are very concerned about this term science, that we want to be scientific. Because when we're talking about complex social interactions, okay, it can often sometimes be questionable. So if we are backed by scientific methodology, processes, okay, we follow certain laws and rules when we do the research, it will give us more credibility. So this is how we relate, okay, science, social science, and communication. So what is communication? I think we have already had several lectures on communication before this, but the science of communication is really simple. It is just about transmitting information and how to effectively do it. Okay, so in what we call it in a more formal term, communication is actually how humans convey and receive messages and how these processes impact individuals and societies. So why was there why was there this interest in studying communication? Okay, why did scholars, okay, wanted to theorize, make relationship, to better understand communication processes? Because throughout history, human has discovered, okay, that communication is an essential process to everyday life, to development. And unfortunately, of course, as we know that a lot of our textbooks or our theories, especially in communication, has been Western oriented, where we look at how communication was, how did communication became a scholarly or scholarship area? Okay, because according to the Western ideas is that through Western histories, they started to see the importance or to identify the need for effective communication. Okay, what is effective communication? Which is the ability to send the right information to the audiences. So one of the first theory or the way they look at this communication process was through the idea of rhetoric. So rhetoric is the idea of based on Greek civilization. Greek thinkers, Plato and Aristotle, they come up with this idea of rhetoric, where they feel that there is an art to persuade. When you use the right way to speak, when you use the right way to express yourself, okay, it will bring different, feedbacks. So when they started to look at this and observe how people communicate and tried to introduce the idea of rhetoric, then they started to discover, okay, that communication can actually be designed, that communication can actually be studied. On one hand, here we're talking about communication, okay, which is rather interpersonal, human to human. But as human evolved, all right, and throughout history, we see the development of technology. And within the area of media and communication, we had the rise of the printing press. So if you can see the image here, this is actually the printing press, considered one of the first revolutionary development in media and communication, because it allowed for the publication of books in bulks, which also gave rise to the idea of mass media and mass communication. Historically, when we talk about this idea of rhetoric, it is interpersonal. Interpersonal meaning one to one, but mass meaning one to many or many to many. And suddenly, the the transfer of information became expedited. It grew very big, and the rise of mass media, okay, brought in a different impact, a different influence, okay, into human lives. And this further gave more interest or even more significance in the study of media and communication. And when we need to study media and communication, this is also gave rise to the new theories in research. So to get to the contemporary, I think it's also very important for us to get a bit of a historical background. Why do I want to start with Aristotle's communication model? Because this is considered probably one of the earliest, if not the earliest, theories of communication. Like I've mentioned before, humans started to become very interested in this concept of effective communication. So how to better explain it? So Aristotle and his friends at the time, okay, came up with this concept of rhetoric, where he says, with the right communication plan, okay, we can persuade the audience or the listeners. So Aristotle emphasized on three functions in communication, which he has described as ethos, pathos, and logos. According to Aristotle, okay, the message is really the ownership of the speaker, the sender. If the sender has a good credibility and has an emotional appeal and able to present his information or his presentation in a very logical argument, he would be able to engage in what we consider just now as an effective communication. So in no way this Aristotle's model or rhetoric is scientific, because I mentioned just now, right, when we talk about scientific theory, it has to be measured. It has to be empirical. But what Aristotle did was based on observation. Although this original rhetoric theory is not what we would consider as sophisticated, it laid the ground to studying and theorizing communication. So as people, or I would consider civilizations, communities, and societies grew, okay, and they are become more, familiar with the importance of communication, there were other communication models that were introduced. I think those who study communication would know this is probably the most common model that we start with when we study communication, which is the Shannon and Weaver model of communication. What is interesting is that Shannon and Weaver are actually mathematicians. So the model that they came up with is actually a mathematical model that looks at the transfer of information. But in communication studies, we have adopted this model because it is also relevant to what we study. So what is interesting with this model is actually we could consider it as an improvement as well as a more sophisticated expansion of the rhetorics, because Shannon and Weaver had identified 6 key concepts, which is the sender, encoder, channel, noise, decoder, and receiver. So although I don't have the intention to explain this particular theory in detail, what I really want to show is how it has developed the theory of communication from something that is very simple, like rhetoric, into something that is more sophisticated and better well explained. So what this model has done is that it shows that communication is one way and linear, although now it is criticized for not being inclusive. But what it did was it has given us, those who study communication, a clearer picture, okay, how communication works and process. So if we are able to identify these concepts, we are able to even manipulate the communication process. At the same time, while Shannon and Weaver introduced their model, Harold Laswell, a professor, actually an American political scientist, but also we consider him a communication theorist, came up with a similar model, trying to explain this communication process. But Laswell's theory is rather more, I would say, flexible in terms that it talks about not really a consequential linear process, but he wants to look at the whole more, what we call it, inclusive, not inclusive, a more detailed way of looking at the process by identifying the concept of who says what, to whom, through which channel, with what effect. So if you can see this model here, okay, it looks almost similar to Shannon and Weaver's, even similar to Aristotle's rhetoric, because it is a linear communication process. Okay, it talks about how the message gets to the receivers. But what is very interesting about Laswell's model is that he highlighted effect. And this is something that is quite important in the study of communication, because all this while scholars were looking at the process, not looking at the effects. What would happen? How can we actually look at what messages does to the do to the people? So initially, Laswell had a political interest because he was more concerned about how media messages affect the recipients of those messages. Obviously, we can see this a lot in the world that we live in today, where political communication with their agendas often use media, often use the communication processes to better influence and even sometimes transmit ideology to the audiences. So while Laswell introduced this model, okay, and the idea of effects then further bring into, I think it basically developed the communication discipline, because then people started to look at effects and don't just look at the process, and they started to talk about the ideas of advertising, public relations. So these are all basically part of the media and communication field, where they are starting to look at communication as beyond sending just interpersonal communication. So fast forward today, in the old times, not really old, but in recent times, when we talk about Laswell or when we talk about Shannon and Weaver, the focus is really on human communication. But in contemporary times, the way that we live today, obviously, when we talk about communication, it is beyond human interactions. Now we also include machines, include things in the communication process. So when we talk about what is contemporary, then we have to acknowledge that the communication process has really grown and it has become more complicated. No longer direct sender to receiver. For example, as you can see this model, the internet model of communication, when we talk about the users, okay, and when we talk about the source of the message, it's no longer organizations or just individuals. It could be both at the same time. and that whoever is the source are also the receivers. So it's rather complicated. Because now when we talk about communication, we're no longer talking about one-way direction. Okay? It is really about multi-directional communication. And this process is not what we call it staggered, it is real time. You are sending and receiving messages. So we're talking about networks now, okay? And we're no longer confined to the straight, like I've mentioned just now, sender-receiver relationship. And communication is no longer confined by time and space, but it is now global. And instant communication has allowed us to go against not just geographical, but even a spatial challenges.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy with your agreement to that. And now we're even talking about Internet of Things. We're not just talking about human interactions with one another. We're talking about human interacting with things, and things are interacting with things. And what do we mean by things are interacting with things? Because of the rise of this technology, okay, we sometimes have even what we call it skipped the human interactions where the devices, where the machines are now interacting with one another. When we talk about the Internet of Things communication model, we have device-to-device communication, device-to-cloud communication. So what is this? This is actually to tell us that everything in this world is no longer just human. Things, buildings, systems are all connected and communicating with one another. So that is why today, for example, when we talk about the Internet of Things, one of the best example is the concept of the smart home. I'm sure many of us here today already have a smart home where we no longer have to be at home to switch on the television, or we no longer have to be at home to vacuum our floors, because we can connect that all to our devices. So this, I would say, what I am trying to tell you from the idea of rhetoric to the idea of this Internet of Things is the development of the communication process and how we theorize communication. Communication from something that is simple as if sending information into something that is more complicated, more inclusive, talking not just about sending information from one person to another, but sending a message from one system to another system. How one man or one person is no longer just connected to another person, but also connected to a certain system, connected to his house, connected to his cars. So when we talk about what is contemporary, then this is contemporary. Communication, okay, has become very technologically oriented, and communication has become rather complex. And so this is something that theorists have to continuously adapt. So having said that, I would like to make a little jump. So I hope I've been able to discuss what is contemporary. And yes, the models that I have shared with you just now is obviously very Western models, because it is essentially just trying to explain a process. But when we talk about theories, like I've mentioned in the first slide, we're talking about human behaviors. We're also talking about how to probably even solve certain human problems. And when we talk about things that human, they're not really always mechanical. And this is, I think, one of the main issues when we talk about Western theories, because many Western communication theories, like the one that I have just listed just now, are very individualistic. What do I mean by individualistic? If you go back to the theories of rhetoric, it focuses on how a person can influence. Okay, and what is the process to come up with the best knowledge? So when it is individualistic, sometimes it does not help serve social issues. Okay, because we are essentially humans that live with one another. And I think one of the other main problem with Western theories is the concept of value neutral. What do we mean value neutral? I hope you can just go back and remember a little bit when I talk about science, when I talked about positivism. When we look at these theories, Western theories, they tend to look at the world that we live in as something that is observable, that is material. And they will only be able to study what is up to their intellectual ability. And because of this, they tend to overlook things that are spiritual, ethical, what are the collective experience. And these are basically the experiences of many non-Western and religious societies. So I would say then, if we are only focused on the communication Western theories, more specifically communication theories, we are going to be rather exclusive of other experiences. Because if we think that everything must only be measurable, then it can lead to things that are simplified. And one of the, I think, challenges of Western theories and being positivist, value neutral, is that objectivity most of the time can be secular, and objectivity actually takes you away from taking a stand or making the right decisions. And all of this concept of being neutral cannot be applied in contemporary times, especially because we talk about media, mass media, internet, where the transfer of information not only comes through messages, but through culture, and brings it with so many other issues such as ideology, such as domination, such as even colonialism. So these are theories that positivist Western communication theories, either it was unintentionally designed or they probably intentionally do not want to address this kind of issues. And this gave rise to the idea of critical theory, also not really an Islamic theory, but critical theory would probably break away from Western American theories. So what is critical theory? As the name suggests, these are theories that ask questions, that it is not neutral. So this critical theory became rather prominent in the 1960s because it was popularized by German scholars inspired by Marxism, not really entirely talking about communism. So Marxism is really an approach that questions this concept of capitalism. It talks about the what we call it challenges of power relations. So in critical theory, it is like trying to respond to the weaknesses of what we have discussed just now, all of these models of all of these positivist theories, because critical theories try to question the bigger picture. For example, when we talk about mass media and we will talk about effects, it's not just about trying to get the most effective process and getting the right response. It is more concerned with bigger issues, such as justice, such as what we call it, domination, like I've mentioned just now. And critical theory really did essentially became very prominent as a response to the American and the Western media domination. As we know, or as we experience today, okay, the media that we mostly consume are American. So with this content that is not inclusive and can be rather racist and discriminatory, okay, how can we question? How can we challenge it? So critical theory suggests that we need to be more, to shift the communication studies. We cannot be objective. We cannot be just looking at things that are measurable, because some human effects are qualitative that needs to be interpreted. So there is always an emphasis on the political and cultural dimensions of media and communication. So in critical theory, they always talk about the concept of power relations or the concept of status quo, where they essentially believe, especially in relations to media and communication, that media is a tool that is being used by some power or by someone to maintain their status quo, to basically force on their power to some other groups of people. So some example of theories under this critical theory umbrella is post-colonial theory, Orientalism, feminist theories. Maybe some of you are familiar with the idea of Orientalism that was but popularized by Edward Said, where he mentioned that a lot of the media context on the way that basically how we see the world today, or maybe if we look at the context of the Muslim societies, where we sometimes feel inferior to the West, is because of how the media has basically uphold the Western status quo, or how the Americans, for example, through their ownership of the media, okay, has designed, okay, how we, the rest of the world, see their superiority. So, so I would say that these are examples of critical theory, which is, like I said, a response to this idea of Western positivism. And I would like to bring this us to the idea of these Islamic contributions. It's not that there is a gap between this development of communication theories, where I just mentioned about positivism and critical theory. Why I actually look at that first was to show how Western theories, okay, in its attempt to be scientific, in its attempt to be sophisticated, has moved toward a very narrow understanding of human behaviors. Okay, the Western theories, like all the models that I have showed you just now, they focus on the impact of communication. Okay, what is beneficial to the individuals. And then critical theory then tried to explain this, but only focusing on the idea of power, only concerned with the idea of who is dominating who. What is lacked probably in these Western theories, and I would say that critical theory is also essentially Western, okay, has often overlooked the contributions of other civilizations, including Islamic scholars, because Islamic scholars have long recognized the idea of ethical dimensions in communication and emphasized accountability. So this is, I think, the main what is lacked with Western theories, the ethical dimensions and accountability. Where Western theories would like to just describe, to explain, but not put responsibility on anyone, not the source, not the receiver. And this is something that is problematic because, like we mentioned, right, we're talking about human behaviors. So Islamic perspective highlights on the idea of ethics. And what is contemporary? Contemporary times, as we probably know, not just in communication, but through social science, there is this more and more interest, importance placed on the concept of ethics. So of course, we know in the Quran, there has been many verses that talks about the issues of the importance of ethical behaviors, right? Especially when we are communicating. For example, in the Surah Al-Kahf, where Allah says, not a word does he utter except that there is no an observer with him ready to record. So this is a concept, okay, that is probably incomprehensible by the West. A concept that is beyond what is material. A concept that, when you communicate, that when you do something, it is beyond human interaction, that there is a bigger power that is holding you accountable. But if we have this idea of accountability, being responsible not only to what is material to you, then this can bring, I think, human civilization in general, okay, to a more ethical process of communication. And just like many other presenters before me, when we talk about Islamic contributions, okay, and the importance of the Islamic methods or theories, the key concept definitely would be rooted in the idea of Tawheed, the oneness of God. So this idea of this oneness of God, okay, the idea that there is a power that is bigger, okay, would basically govern, okay, a more inclusive theoretical process. Where in Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, oh, you who believed, fear Allah and speak only words of appropriate justice. So this concept of justice, credibility, okay, ethics was basically not considered important by the West in the old days. But when we fast forward today, that as you can see with the rise of misinformation, miscommunication, okay, the West have been talking about issues of ethics, about responsibility, about accountability, as if they just realize that these are all important components. While in Islam, we know that this is not just an Islamic important component, that in the Islamic communication, these are the building blocks. So I would say that the main contribution, okay, of Islam in the communication theory is the emphasis on ethics, virtues, and moral responsibilities. So these are probably things that are considered abstract within this Western scholarship. And actually, in Islam, we have our own communication theorists, although they have not really been acknowledged as communication theories per se. But I think this is probably one of the interesting thing about Muslim scholarship, Muslim scholars. They are automatically scientists and social scientists. For example, Ibn Khaldun have essentially been has stressed from the start about the importance of communication in building social cohesion. Okay, he theorized the concept of asabiyah, social cohesion, where he related communication and the building of strong community and the building of what we call it, strong civilization. So he sees communication as a building block. But this communication process is not individualistic. It is divine. It is collective. So it is a communication here is theorized in a way that is rather different from how the West have theorized it. So in 2007, a communication scholar, Hamid Maulana, did try to come up with a Islamic communication model. So as you can see in this diagram that I have shared with you, okay, so Maulana tried to integrate, okay, these Western ideas that would probably be seen as more systematic to a more realistic, okay, and a more divine communication process that goes beyond what is only humanistic. So Hamid Maulana has basically included all of this concept of Tawheed, Ummah, okay, as we know, Amar Ma'ruf, Nahi Munkar, Adil, Amanah, Shura, and Hikmah within this communication model, where we still highlight the importance of sender, receiver, message, okay, and the basic communication components. But all of these components are guided, okay, by concepts that are more inclusive and more realistic to the human needs, okay, and also able to include the importance of the concept of ethics and moral with the idea of Amar Ma'ruf Nahi Munkar, Adil, Amanah, Shura, and Hikmah. So due to the time limitations that I have, I think I will go faster. And if you have any questions, you can ask later. I think when we talk about contemporary theories, and if we want to narrow down into communication theories, I would say that there is definitely a Western bias, that when we look at media, when we look at communication, we're always taking this Western paradigm that at one point probably worked well, but now when we are living in a more globalized world, okay, the models or theories that are introduced by the West is not inclusive. And it is not able to answer all of human problems because it is essentially very mechanistic. So this brings us to the importance of this Tawhidic epistemology, talking about moral, ethics, accountability, something that is beyond what the West sees as normal process. And there needs to be a collective well-being, that when we talk about media and communication, that is not just about sending information, but a more collective goal. And I think in light of these Western theories being challenged, or Western civilization today as we see it are becoming less and less relevant, so it is time, I think, that Islamic frameworks provide more holistic, ethical and community focused perspective. Because inclusive theories that integrate diverse worldviews, Islamic, and even if it's not Islamic, are essential to address changing global needs, so that in general we can move towards a more balanced, ethical communication practices. So I think I would stop here, and I hope that my presentation has benefited all of you, and I thank you very much for your attention, and I apologize for any mistakes that I may have unintentionally did. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you very much, Doctor. The class very interesting, mashallah. And Doctor, we open for the Q&A, Doctor, yeah?
Okay, sure. Yeah, can I just...
You can raise up your hand. Yes, yes. Yeah. From the chat box, Doctor, there is a question in the chat box.
Okay. So there's a few questions I would ask. For example, from Sister Nur Saada that talk about, is technology really value neutral? If we're really taking from the context of the Western positivist overview, they would say that it is value neutral. But through our own, what we call it, experience, as we can see in the world that we live in today, definitely the technology is not value neutral. Actually, there is also a theory called what we call it, the technological determinism, that talks about how technology has basically been used to change human actions and everything about the human civilization. And they do this through the distribution of culture, values through technology. And I think one of the best example is how we use our social media. For example, if you are on Instagram, how can we say that Instagram does not have value? Okay, Instagram pushes us to share, to be visual, okay, to show only what is best, or to curate a certain personality that sometimes is not our natural personality. So that in itself is value. So every medium, I would say, has values. Yeah. Do I have any other questions? Comment on the creation of AI and fake news, and when we are not able. Yes, I agree. The problem with AI, of course, AI also brings benefits. One of the main issues is accountability. Also, this is what I think I would like to discuss just now when we talk about how Islamic contribution to the theories would highlight on this concept of accountability, on morality, because as you know that AI and new technologies is very hard for us to govern or to put it within certain legal jurisdictions. So we need to really rely on literacy, on telling people on what is the best way to mitigate these issues, or to deal with the idea of AI and fake news, misinformation, disinformation. And I think this concept of tawheed, concept of, being fearful of something that is bigger than us, is something that, while some people would say as abstract, it can really be powerful in equipping society in general in dealing with this onslaught of AI and fake news. Yes. Can there be instances where weaponizing or taking advantages of the ignorance of the masses, the communication and rhetorical speech, be ethical? I hope I'm getting the question correct. But if we are starting the statement by saying weaponizing or taking advantage, obviously there is going to be some ethical contradictions there. But of course, to achieve certain goals, and if we're taking the rhetorical perspective, okay, we're really talking about the process of getting into effective communication. But if this process of effective communication is going to bring us into the idea of colonialism, what we call it, control, then definitely it will not be ethical. Yeah. Okay. Do I have time? Maybe I'll just answer one more question here from Adidiran that asks, why is it that the ideas of accountability was not thought through? I wouldn't say that it was not thought through. And I am assuming that, we are talking about contemporary times, the way that and when I mention we, communication scholars in general, Muslim and non-Muslim, has been relying on the Western ideas that have only recently talked about accountability and ethics and morality. There is obviously a bigger reasons to this. For example, when we talk about Western theories, which, as I have mentioned, are rather individualistic, are value neutral. So there is essentially a more ideological reasons to why they are being we call it individualistic, okay, being value neutral, because this process essentially helps them maintain their own status quo in the sense that it does not promote the context of questioning of putting responsibility, and this allows the West especially to continuously do or engage in whatever practices that benefits them. So that is why this idea of accountability was not really highlighted, and it is now become more prominent in recent times, I think, due also to the idea of this globalization, when non-Western groups, non-Western scholars, non-Western practitioners are demanding a different way, okay, and how, for example, post-colonial states are demanding, okay, their colonial powers to be accountable and responsible. So I think that this is one of the reason why it was not, accountability was not being mainstreamed, and why it is only now that it is becoming more prominent. Okay. Okay, last one, I think, from Sulaiman. Don't you see that Islamic perspective you are talking is positioning itself as passive and defensive instead of being proactive and attacking in terms of contribution counter times? Okay. Oh, Sulaiman, your question is rather challenging. I think in my own personal experience, I'm not trying to position the Islamic perspective as being passive or defensive. I guess it would be rather hard for me to conceptualize the whole idea of presenting an Islamic, what we call it, theories or Islamic worldview, and adapting it, not just adapting it, to explain it in relation to the Western theories within these 45 minutes. But I would say that what I am trying to say here is that the Islamic perspective has offered a very, what we call it, wide, okay, overview of communication process in general. And that for the longest time, it has talked about morality, it has talked about accountability, okay, and ethical practice. So these are all ideas, okay, or values that were not being put forth, okay, in mainstream theories, okay, especially in communication. Okay, and now since that we have more Islamic scholars in the mainstream, okay, we are trying to reflect back and take all of these concepts that have always been prevalent and try to I think be proactive, okay, by guiding, okay, this Western perspective that has always been rather biased. And I wouldn't say that Islamic perspective should be attacking. Okay, we should be probably not just contributing, but also in the context of contemporary times, probably even remedy, okay, a lot of these issues or problems that have been brought by the very narrow and sometimes biased Western communication theories. Yes, I think that is it. Did I miss anything? If you are interested to know more, maybe you can just email me, or we can, email would be good. Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum.